Bedrock doesn't have those sort of
Recording is on.
Yeah,
All right.
something's recording.
Yep, I just turned on recording because I wanted to know whether or not that was something I could do. I had to go and remind myself what my Dropbox situation was.
Oh, so it's going to dump in. Okay, that's good. I don't have a Dropbox account, so I couldn't do that. I tried setting up the YouTube stream, but it kept bombing out after like 10 seconds.
Well, this is somewhat of an experiment because I just have a free Dropbox account, so we'll see whether or not it overwhelms it, etc. But worth trying because God knows what I take in the way of notes is as good as I can do, but often probably you guys would read them and be like, "That's kind of what I said." So
yeah, I'm curious to know how Jitsi records it. If it just will record, like if you have the grid view on your screen, if it just records that, or if it records whoever's speaking, it'll be interesting. But anyway, I think Hans is here, so we can probably get going. I see him muted.
Yep, I'm here.
Oh, okay, great.
Let's start with doing updates. Brian, you already said you don't really have anything new to update on, so that means it goes to Brian Joseph, who wasn't coming today, so that takes us to Hans.
So I pushed out the new version of the graph simplification path like at the beginning of the week, early Monday, and I am just working on like cleaning things up a bit and like making sure there are no more issues and stuff. Working on fixing the rest of the small issues, but the current version is very usable. So that's up and ready. I think that's about it for me.
All right, Luke.
I think it was.
I am. One second. I am back on Lumen. I'm no longer doing the project with Brian, for now at least. I'm getting the runtime switching working. Right now, I'm where it was left off like 18 days ago was full works with the minimal calling convention, but I need to make sure that everything on top of full works. And right now, the builds are broke because the reference of Paul's Bumpalo that the build is using is gone because he must have done a force push, and so I need to either figure out the cargo patch for it or
just update nightly.
Oh, just go on the nightly branch.
Just update your nightly compiler. The allocator stuff changed again.
I mean, I'm even with develop. I rebased and it's still a problem.
No, I'm talking about the Rust compiler. Update your nightly Rust compiler.
And it
will fix the compilation issues with the bump allocator. Well, you might have to do cargo update bump allo locally to force it in the cargo lock file.
Okay.
But
right now
I fixed the crates hash brown and bump allo upstream, so they work now with the latest nightly.
So right now the problem is that lib EIR on the Lumen branch references a version of your Bumpalo that's broke. That's the problem. It's not anything with like the Rust compiler.
Yeah, I'm pushing a new version of lib EIR today,
okay,
but
so until that's
I haven't
broke,
yet. You can actually just check out a local. Use the patch syntax, like clone libEIR locally. You uncomment the patch stuff in the root cargo.toml file.
Oh, no. I don't locally. It's the CI. I'm trying to get the CI to work.
Well, CI is going to be fucking broke right now because they changed all that shit in nightly again. So there's nothing we can do about that.
Okay.
Until I push the new version of the compiler with libEIR updated and the compiler updated, CI will be broken temporarily.
Okay.
I'm expecting to do that today or tomorrow.
Yeah, so right now the issue is like we all have it cached locally in a working version, but CI doesn't. And so like it can't see the old version that worked because GitHub garbage GC'd the commit we were referencing, unfortunately. Yeah, so right now that's stuck. I'll see if the cache version I have works, or if with me messing around locally broke my cache version. Now I'm also broke.
You don't need the cached version. What I'm saying is if you uncomment the patch in cargo.toml to reference your
Oh,
local
right. Locally, I
copy,
can use the path. Yeah, you're right. Okay,
then
I'll
you'll
do
be
that
fine.
and just wait on the CI. Yeah. So what I'm going to do, because I don't want to figure out how in Rust to do the ASM macro, is I will do the minimal calling OTP tests in Erlang code. Oh, yeah. Okay.
One thing to keep in mind is that I've got changes to the minimal crate that I had to make for the exception handling stuff. That includes some modifications to how the process spawn sets up the stack and the initial state of the registers and how the swap stack is performed. None of that should matter outside of the scheduler, but there may be some stuff in there that, you know, you'll want to look at. I was planning to push that already. Well, I'll wait for you to finish your update before I go into it, I guess.
Oh no, I would push your stuff because I think it's easier for me to adapt to your changes because I'm still, I'm going to have to update everything that depends on full still. Just go for it because like yours is the path to us writing the tests in Erlang, and mine is just
Yeah.
making the old tests still work as demos.
What I'm saying is that I haven't pushed it yet because I have to. It's like a chain reaction of things here. The nightly changes. I needed to update EIR so that I can apply patches to propagate location information in some areas because LVM chokes on the lack of debug information when optimizations are applied. So if it tries to inline a call to a function with debug information into a function with debug information, but the call instruction doesn't have debug locations, LVM considers that invalid, won't do it.
Oh, is that an LVM lets us not have debug info? Because I thought MLIR
Yes.
forced us to have debug info.
Yeah, what I'm saying is that in EIR, we aren't propagating location information correctly. And so I was tracking that issue down and fixing it when I realized that a lot of the places I was going to have to examine and change were being modified by Hans in his work. So I started going through the process yesterday of updating to his changes since he pushed those. And in order to do that, I also had to update my nightly compiler and fix the bump out and hash brown crates because it broke when I tried to merge our branches together. And then I got that fixed yesterday and am now fixing our use of Alec in our crates again, which I just about finished last night. Anyways, it was a whole clusterfuck of trying to follow the chain of things that broke there because of that.
Do you know the exact nightly date in case they changed it again on us so we can repin?
Oh, I don't update super frequently, but I would say just grab the 1st of May, one.
Okay, I'll try that.
For CI, it just grab whatever the latest nightly is. Like, let's just pin against the latest nightly.
Oh, we can't.
As of today.
Yeah, okay, because I'm like, we have to pin something in the Docker file.
Right. But rather than going like back arbitrarily, let's just take whatever the latest dated one is. And so, yeah, with the location tracking, I discovered this because I was like, I had reworked how the pass manager stuff worked in order to take advantage of some of the stuff I needed when I was doing the exception handling work. So once I got that implemented, I decided to see how compiling with, well, I changed it so that optimizations are applied by default, just like Rust does, and just like a variety of other compilers. So O2 is the default optimization level, but compiling with optimizations was generating invalid LVMIR, and I couldn't figure out why until I finally tracked down the specific issue, which is that, you know, as I mentioned, inlining a call into a function with debug info when the call instruction itself doesn't have it it breaks LVM cogen. So you can successfully compile without optimizations because it doesn't do inlining, but without inlining, you know, there's a variety of other problems. So it's not like a blocker, but it's a pretty significant issue. So I want to make sure that we address that as soon as possible. And now that Hans has that major chunk of work with the simplification pass done, I had a couple notes on things that I want to prioritize next there because I think they're important for a couple different reasons. One is making sure that we're correctly propagating spans location info everywhere. For this, now that I'm going to push my updated version of the EIR branch, which merges my commits that I've had on our branch for a while with the latest ones that Hans has in master. And I think we're going to want to then merge that work collectively back into master itself. But we can also just work on the Lumen branch if you don't want to do that. But
yeah, no, let's get it in master as soon as possible.
The main thing there, I already started doing a bunch of work in that area. So one of the major reasons why I merged instead of just rebased is that a lot of functions that weren't previously taking spans now do. But we may want to rework how that, like I want to basically spend a little bit of time with you, Hans, to best discuss how best to do that. It's really critical that not only we do propagate some location information for everything, but that, you know, it's actually usable, like it references something that's meaningful when you're stepping through the code. So yeah. I think in a lot of places right now, what I'm seeing when I decided to switch over and try and merge our work just so I could start applying patches was that basically no calls are getting location information propagated sometime during the lowering of the control flow graph. So initially when you're lowering from the AST into EIR, that initial step, I see spans for all the calls. But yeah, at some point, those are all lost. And there's two APIs that I was a little bit confused with. I finally realized that either I'm using them wrong or something is not lining up right. But there's block locations API and a value locations API. But blocks are also values. And in a number of places within the EIR code base in the lowering, I saw fetching locations by getting the value locations for a block of value. And then, but it was like, it didn't make sense to me why we would be doing that versus just assigning location to a block, or, you know, picking one or the other basically. And I think somewhere in there is where that information is being lost.
Wouldn't the value location be for like a specific location of the value, like in a pattern match? So like column information matters, while block just gets the line?
There is more granularity than that, but the top level operation, each block basically has like one operation in it. But that operation may have components, bindings, and such that themselves have locations as well. And so a call, for example, is going to be like the operation for a block, but that call has reads or, values that it takes for like the callee and the arguments. And those individual things also would have source spans. The problem is that either we're using the wrong API there, block locations versus value locations, somewhere in the chain, and that's dropping those locations, or something else is going wonky there. Like we're removing a block and recreating a block, but not assigning the location to the new block. There's a bunch of places where I saw that blocks are inserted with no locations, but I do have an API that does create blocks with spans now. So transitioning maybe to always requiring a block to have a span and tracing that back to either a fused location or a single source location that makes sense. Things like that we're going to need to do.
There are a lot of places right now where there are not block location sets, mainly because like I had no relationship to it in that it was just a free-floating API that like I knew initially they were propagated to the IR when it was lowered because I did that. But then like making sure that all the data is proper, it's like not having it lowered to code and actually like seeing how it works out. It's sort of limiting in that sense. And I mean, we will need to do tests for all of the different passes and stuff like the off note. I think the mangling implementation does propagate location information, at least basic location information. But then there's places in, say, the graph simplification pass where we'll have to sort of think a bit more about what location information we want to propagate to where and how we want to fuse things together and stuff to like produce the best results for the debugger.
I think we can definitely get something in that is maybe not perfect, but gets pretty close fairly trivially by just using sort of equational reasoning about it, right? So if we're joining two blocks into a single one, we just create a fused location for that. If we're splitting a block into multiple, then we just copy the source spans.
Yeah.
If we're breaking an operation into multiple smaller operations, then we would propagate the span for the source operation into all those children. And vice versa, if we're joining a bunch of operations back into a single operation, we would fuse those locations. I think just taking that approach alone would get location information propagated everywhere. It may not be as useful as getting more granular in that, but it would not probably violate our assumptions too heavily.
Yeah.
But the main thing, at least for LLVM's concern right now, is that we need to, at a minimum, propagate location information for calls. That's the major one, is the inlining of calls. So all call instructions require valid source location. So using an unknown location does not work. And part of the reason why that doesn't work is that MLIR generates like very default basic debug info for us. But one of the things it does is if it sees that it's got an unknown location, it doesn't try and like generate anything. I'm not even sure that even if that check was bypassed, that LVM would accept bogus locations. You know what I mean? So
is it like sort of
we do
hashing
need to
it where
feed
they
it
have
something.
to be unique?
What do you mean?
Well, I know for a while we were using no file, no source at one of the levels, but assuming that's breaking it because they all look like they're in the same spot, and that breaks it tracking it somehow. So they must be using it as a key somehow.
That's what I'm basically referring to, is the concept of an unknown location is essentially one that has no source file, no line or column. It's considered opaque. And so MLIR and I believe LLVM as well do not recognize unknown at least for the purpose of this verification check.
But like, is the word no file, no line like magic? Like, how does it know the values we're using are an unknown location?
No, I'm not talking about like a file that actually exists somewhere. I'm talking about the actual location structure is unknown. Like
Oh,
there is an opaque pipe.
Okay, I thought we were passing in always no file and like 0 for the line, because I saw that in some of the like top level code in Rust. We were
Oh
passing in
no,
like a
yeah.
bad.
Like if we're in the places where we're running tests where we like feed it source span unknown, that is that's equivalent. That's treated as an unknown location when it's lowered to MLIR and then LLVM. Within our like front end and middle tier, it's basically just as valid as any other location, although you can't do certain things with it, like get the source code for it. But there's no meaningful way for us to lower those unknown locations into MLIR in a way that it sees it like it exists. Or rather, we probably could, but it would be super broken. The debug info it generate would be all wrong because, as you say, all the locations would appear to be at the same place. And it might work, it might compile, but it would totally break the debug info. So I'm not sure that's the right approach. As I mentioned, like I can still do compiles without enabling optimization. What I want to address is, I mean, just in general, making the debug info useful so that when we're debugging the generated code, we can actually step through it properly in the debugger. But the other part of it is that I want to make sure that when we're running the compiler with the default options, you know, we're doing the right thing. So I think that's probably the next highest priority from my perspective on the EIR side. And then while we're doing that, I'm also going to be integrating the changes that Hans has made to the binary and receive intrinsics. I just started making changes to refactor to use the new like dialect operation setup that Hans introduced into EIR. So I will probably have more meaningful feedback on, you know, whether I've hit any weird issues or whatnot, like in a couple days. Maybe if I get through it today, I'll be able to start giving you some good feedback. But that will, that's
the one thing that might be a little bit awkward, but it shouldn't be too bad. Is like actually matching on these dynamic operations. Like you have to like take right now. You have to take the type ID and you have to check equality, which I mean, could be worse, but it's pretty awkward.
I mean, it's a little bit awkward, but not that bad. It's not unlike how you have to do that stuff in C++. I mean, not quite as ergonomic as it is in C++, but it's not a big deal. Another thing that maybe we should start doing at some point here soon is just tracking some basic profiling information before we get too far down the road. So both on, one of the things I went through and added in my recent set of changes was a bunch of profiling like options and flags and all the infrastructure for it, so that we can time how long the compiler takes to compile something, how long it spends in like parsing, code gen, all that jazz. What I don't really have any visibility into at this point is EIR, but that's something that I think we should probably add in the near future. the point of that being that we can start tracking how our changes impact compile time and the size of the compiled output, so that we can start targeting, or trying to meet our target goals. Especially important when we switch over to WebAssembly, knowing how everything we change or introduce impacts the size of the output and how long it takes to compile is going to tell us, whether or not we're on the right track or going off the rails. So let's see. I also, just like minor thing, Hans. Once we get my changes merged into master on EIR, can we like run the formatter and clean up, like switch all the printf debugging stuff to use like the log crate, so that I don't get a bunch of like output and stuff when I'm running a compiler?
A lot of the, like, as I've encountered it, like in the code, I've switched it over to the logger. So a lot of it, it's like already over on the logger. But
yeah, I did see that.
The rest of it in like one go.
Some of the commits that I have did that on my branch, just because, to avoid dumping that stuff when I'm running the compiler normally in Lumen. But there's some new ones in the stuff you added that I just haven't removed yet in my fork. I can remove those myself.
I didn't think there was any in the stuff I added. I thought all of that was switched over, but I might be wrong.
I'll double check. I saw it in the diff, but maybe I was looking at the wrong side of the diff and thinking that it was adding the change.
There might be some places where it's commented out.
That could be, yeah. I'll double check though.
It's not important. We can figure it out.
Yeah.
Just switch all that over to the logger regardless.
The main thing that running the formatter over all the crates and then having that be pushed up will make it so that when I'm making changes, I don't accidentally format a file and then have a huge diff. That's happened to me several times now.
Yeah.
And it's just because I have Emacs automatically doing that.
We can add the formatter to CI as well, just to make it easy.
Oh yeah, that'll help with PRs and such for sure. Those are the only real notes I had there. So right now, my work in progress branch has all the exception handling stuff and the updates to EIR, and I did push the bump out and hash brown stuff so that stuff's updated, but I need to push my merge of the EIR work and then update or finish updating the allocator stuff in the main Lumen crates, and I can push what I have. CI will still be broken because the compiler tests will be broken until the location information stuff is addressed, but that can be sort of our next step. But that'll at least allow Luke for you to look at the work that I've been doing on the minimal crate. And if there's any gotchas there, we can work through that.
I think the only thing would be is if there was something that looked like it was common code between the two and I pulled the core and now it's no longer common, it has to go back out into being just in full and minimal again. That'd be the only gotcha.
Sure, yeah. I don't think I've made changes to anything that would be considered common code, but it's possible. In any case, if I hit that when I'm doing a merge, I'll work around it by doing, making the changes that need to be made to make it work within, the structure you define, unless there's some sort of hard limitation, but then I'll just ping you and we can figure out what to do about that. Most of what I'm talking about though is in the core parts of the scheduler that are setting up the process stack and swapping stacks, the parts that are written in assembly basically. So
yeah, I haven't touched that. If anything, full is using more of that infrastructure, and that's how it got pushed to core. But if you change it to minimal, I'll just make sure to move it to core on my branch. It'll be fine.
Yeah, it's definitely a delicate part of the code, so we'll want to make sure that when we're working on it, one side or the other, that we both take a look at all the changes that are made there, so that if there's any dependencies or any changes that would impact either the full or the minimal crate, we know what needs to happen there.
So far,
I think
the
long
only-
term that won't probably be too much of an issue, but at least in the near term, I think they're probably more intertwined. Is that valid assumption?
Yeah, I think it'll be okay. So far, the only things that Git hasn't auto resolved is like it lost some of your gas map changes, but then like the build caught them, so that wasn't a big deal. And I had to redo the target triple rename on the workspaces since I split up the workspaces to use more of our resources that Microsoft is so nicely giving us.
Oh, sure. Yeah, that was, I feel like that was another thing too. Let me just double check, make sure I'm not forgetting something here. I've made a few more like cleanup changes to like the LVM and MLIR crates and introduced a new profiling crate. The profiling crate is really designed for the compiler though, so it's under the compiler like subdirectory. But in theory, I don't think there's any reason why it couldn't be used elsewhere, but probably I think right now it depends on, or it's assumed that you're running it on like x86 because it has some dependencies on like libc and stuff like that. So
Paul, this reminds me, I had a question about the Lumen table gen. When I do make table gen, is it just supposed to stay in the debug build directory and I have to reference it there if I want to run it manually, like before I run cargo check? Or is it supposed to be linked somewhere so I can use it? Like
you're talking about the Lumen table gen executable?
Right, because like when I run cargo check from root to just like double check before I commit, it blows up as like it can't find it because it's just like a debug build. It's not, it's under the target directory. It's not on a path I have. Should I be setting up my path differently to find it?
Oh, I see. So what I can do is make the build script handle that for you. So right now, the build, at least on the compiler side, depends on that executable being there. One option is that you could, build that executable and then just copy it into your path somewhere. I think that should probably work, but it generates it by default as like a build dependency, right? So it's going to be like some hash that gets some build directory that gets placed in, and then all the other crates that depend on that know how to find it based on that. The build script, if you look in it, actually deals with that. I don't think I've
it
made
was
any
mostly to
changes
get
that.
the cargo commands to work in my editor. So like I just wanted to make sure I wasn't missing a step where I was supposed to put in like xdg, home or something like that.
So, I just wanted to double check in here.
Yeah, I have the Dropbox.
All right. Is there anything that you wanted to report,
No,
Brian?
No, I don't have anything else to add at the moment. Thank you.
All right. Yeah. Talk to you later.
Bye.
There.
So probably what I would do if I were you is, it's a little bit awkward, right? So the build right now works best when it's done via the build Lumen script, just because it handles a variety of things that a plain cargo build won't. And it's possible that we might be able to move some of this stuff to like a cargo build script or something, but we probably would need to use something like, what is that thing that Rust Analyzer uses? Like Xtool or whatever, to allow the build to be more in Rust. but fundamentally there are some things that won't happen running with cargo. Cargo check should probably work. So the only thing there, I believe, is that you need to build Lumen table gen. Yeah, just looking here, it copies it to, it actually copies it to a directory that's not quite as opaque. So it's under.
Yeah, there's a non-hash version. It's fine. I found
Yeah.
it there. I just wanted to make sure there wasn't an install location, because like using it under the target directory feels off, like I missed a step. But if it's not, that's fine. Like
Yeah, it's
I'll make
only
it,
meant to be generated and used during build. Like we're not using it as like a public tool, so it just only goes in that target directory and is cached there, at least for now. It does get built automatically as part of our code gen library, but only because it's used as a dependency there. We're not actually bundling it or anything like that. Yeah, so I think that should be fine. Like cargo check, as long as you have that on your path, that's basically it. That's all we're doing with it. We're just expecting that it's available on the path. So that path is not referenced anywhere. That like output directory build Lumen table gen tools path thing. We're just appending that directory to the system path. Yeah, I didn't want to like do anything that would break sort of the default cargo tooling, but because our build is sort of a multi-stage affair, it's kind of hard to rely too much on the default stuff. Cargo check is nice because it doesn't actually do any of the builds really, but we do have that one dependency that requires us to table gen those files. So there's not really any way around that for the moment. I'm hoping that at some point the feature set in cargo expands just a little bit so that we could move basically all what we're doing in that bend build Lumen script into like a cargo custom task or something. But I haven't looked into doing that, so I'm not really sure if it's possible or if there's any limitations there. But yeah, so as I mentioned, I'll push that set of changes once I finish the merge and the cleanup of the alloc ref changes that happen in nightly, which will be today. And I'll ping you, Hans, and let you know when I've pushed my EIR changes to Lumen branch, and we can figure out how we want to merge stuff. And I want to start working on the location propagation pretty much right away. I'm basically going to have to. So I would like to sort out with you what you think the best way is to do that. And then once I've got at least the call site information being propagated, I can finish testing my exception handling changes and switch over to, finishing out the binary and receive intrinsics.
Yep, sounds good.
the last thing helped me. I was trying to remember what things we had blocking, like gen server working, but okay, it's exception and the binary and receive are then the next ones afterwards. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, so once those are implemented, then I have all the work implemented for all the process related primitives, the built-ins. I mean, most of that's calling into the runtime, but there's like built-in function shims that I have in the runtime, the core runtime create for those. And that would be basically everything. At that point, we can start figuring out the two branches I talked about last week. Like one is figuring out how to compile parts of the standard library, the Erlang standard library. The other is porting stuff to WebAssembly. So I am going to apply my attention back to the latter one of those as soon as possible here. But I need to wrap up these last few hanging threads. That's it for me, I guess.
All right. Anybody else? Anything else to talk about?
I think I'm done.
I'm done.
Cool. All right. Well, we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, everybody.
See ya.
Bye.